Hi everyone, welcome to Chapter 5's Living Room Lecture. I of course am Professor Klager and this is for Interpersonal Communication, Communication 9. So first I want to just say good job to everybody who's been working so hard to transition to this new online environment. I know that it's awkward and it might feel a little lonely and kind of overwhelming at the same time because this isn't what any of us planned on doing, but it's our new reality for a while. Hopefully we'll be returning back to our typical classroom at the end of April, but it really is just wait and see. So all I can recommend at this point is just make sure that you're following everything that we've got in our online classroom, that you're reaching out if you have questions every week, and do your best to try to stay engaged in your own learning. Hold yourself accountable. If it means that you need to pretend you're at school, take a shower, get dressed, put on clothes that you would wear to school, set yourself up at your kitchen table or in your bedroom, even in your living room. I think the more that we sort of create a sense of continuity and normalcy, the easier it's going to be. All right, so what are we doing this week? So in our syllabus, of course we're kind of a little bit behind because we had a break of about a week off, and then we do still have spring break scheduled, so that's coming up. So you have a couple things to do this week. First, you want to make sure that you complete the exam for chapters 1 through 4. It is an online exam. It is, of course, open book, open note. I can't keep you from doing that, but keep in mind that the exam is timed and you only get one chance at it. So once you select an answer, you can't go back and change it. And when the time runs out for the exam, then you're finished. So even if you're not finished with the test, so you have the same as one class period, so it's like 75 minutes, how much time we would have in a typical classroom. That needs to be completed by Wednesday of this week, which is April 1st. Oh my gosh, it'll be April Fool's Day. So that needs to be completed by Wednesday. All right, so let's move on now into what we're doing for this next unit. So this next unit, we're gonna be focusing on language, so verbal language, nonverbal communication, listening, and emotions. So we're moving outside of ourselves to now, how do we start to interact with other people? All right, so first let's think a bit about language. We've all heard that phrase that sticks and stones can break my bones, but words can never hurt me. And I think if you've ever gotten in an argument with someone and you started hurling insults at each other, or you have something that you're sensitive about and there's a person who knows how to just push your buttons with it, you know that that phrase is wrong. Words are incredibly powerful. They have the ability to bring us together and build our relationships, or of course we can use them to just rip people apart. And I think we see that happen a lot, especially in times of crisis when there's a lot of uncertainty and there's right now trying to figure out how did all this stuff start. And so we need to pay attention to how language is used, because it not only talks about what's going on in the present sense, but it really shapes our idea of history and reality and truth. So think about chapter 4 when we talked about capital T truth and little t truth. And so the way that we talk about things creates our idea of what is the truth. So let's get a little bit into this. So as you're going through the PowerPoint, you want to stop and watch all the videos. Some of them are a little longer than others, but they're all very important to help explain the ideas. So one thing to kind of keep in mind is that language, whether it's spoken language or it's something that we've written down, or whether it's English, French, Spanish, German, whatever, words themselves are symbolic. The sounds that we attach to words are symbolic. The shapes that we use to write letters, all symbolic. It all represents something else. So we always have to look at the way language is used within a greater context. What's going on in pop culture? What's going on in the world around us? What about our own communities and cultural experiences influence the way that we talk about the world and the words that we have available to us to talk about the world? So as you're watching the first couple of videos, you might wonder, why are they calling this guy these names? He doesn't even know what they're saying. Well, it's because in the context of this community's culture, they know that they're throwing him an insult, and he probably catches on pretty quickly, but without having the context of that language, it doesn't make as much sense, which is why we end up having even miscommunication when we are using similar language. Another thing to think about is that our language is constantly evolving. And so the way that when we think about something in our mind, we're connecting it with a word or an experience that is personal to us. That doesn't necessarily mean that another person has the same word or experience in their own mind. So in the book, in this chapter 5, it talks about the Ogden and Richards triangle of meaning, which is essentially saying that there's not a direct connection between a word or a symbol and what it represents for us in our lived experience. So we can change the way we talk about something just by changing the emphasis of it, and it changes the whole meaning. And so if you look at the example in the slides of just the way of changing the way we say a word, it influences our interpretation of that reality. A few other things to kind of note as you go through this chapter is know that language is not static, meaning it's not sticky, it doesn't stay the same all the time. We're always changing, we're always adding and deleting language. Just take slang, for instance, how quickly words come in and out of favor. And so language kind of happens at different levels. We have the really kind of street level of language, which is where slang and technology words and pop culture reference words happen. And it's usually young people who are early adopters of trends that start these words and then kind of use them, and they become part of the regular vernacular of society. Take, for instance, in the movie Mean Girls, Gretchen Wiener tries to start the word fetch as like a trend, and it doesn't really go anywhere. But if enough people start using a word, now it becomes out of that slang place and it becomes part of conversational language. So a lot of times what happens when words or phrases become part of conversational language is that they're no longer slang anymore, and the people who started using them are no longer the ones using them anymore. And then you have your academic language. So this is what we think of in terms of how we write papers, and we think of grammar and sentence structure, proper definitions of words. When we're speaking politely, we're speaking professionally. And so this is the kind of language that we use, that we learn in school, and we when we're speaking correctly. And then you have your technical language, and technical language is really almost as inaccessible as urban language, in that both of them are at the far ends of the language spectrum. So if you're not part of that community, you really are not familiar with what those words or phrases mean. But words change all the time, and they go throughout all these different levels until eventually some words replace others, and our language changes constantly. You can even see how, maybe go back through some of your hashtags or your tweets from a year or two ago. What you're talking about in those references is not the same as what you're talking about now. So let's think a little bit about how we learn language. Okay, there's a few theories about it. Because language is something that we access by hearing it through sound, as we are learning to communicate, we first learn language by hearing it. So this is why we have a particular accent or a dialect, meaning like a regional way of using language. We might sound like our mother, our father, our grandma, whoever is our significant person who has taught us how to speak. So there's some interesting research about how we learn the level of our voice. For instance, it's been found that when people have really deep voices, they tend to be viewed as being more credible, more intelligent, more capable, whereas higher pitched voices are often associated with being childish, weak, maybe kind of silly. But of course we have our genetic predisposition for what our voice will sound like, but we also learn to mirror, or we take the model of what's around us to learn how to communicate when we verbalize our thoughts as well. So this is how we might change the way that we talk based on certain situations. So we have the way that we sound when we communicate verbally. We have the way that we organize our thoughts into a structured sentence. So that's like syntax and grammar, punctuation, order of noun, verb, adverb, adjective, all that kind of stuff. We have semantics, which has to do with when you look at something in context, what are we supposed to understand is the meaning of it. And then we have our pragmatic rules, which is when we get into the nuance of how we emphasize or de-emphasize. So I recommend that you take a few minutes to read through that in the chapter, look at the video that's incorporated into these slides. Our language and use of language also significantly is shaped and reflected by our worldview. So we talked a bit about worldview with culture and with perception, but there's another theory about worldview called the Sapir-Whorf. Now this theory has been a little bit debated over the years as to its accuracy as well as especially its acquisition. It's kind of an interesting story. I think you should look it up when you can. There's some question as to how accurate it is that these researchers were in discovering this theory, but essentially it's saying that our language is a reflection of and a creation of the world or a truth around us. So we have words to describe what we experience in the world, but if we experience something for which we don't have a word, then we create a new word. And this is why it's so important to think about how language shapes the way that we see things. So take, for instance, the whole idea of coronavirus. This is nothing that we had ever heard of this time last year. We've heard of the flu, we've heard of the cold, we've heard of people getting sick with things, but this novel meaning it's new, it's kind of unique virus, which the conversation around it started out with, it's just a flu. And now, no, it's more than a flu. It's a serious threat to, it's a pandemic. And then you have other language around it, for instance, some people have used derogatory words around it, trying to connect the origin of the language with of the disease with the language of it. And so the way that we talk about something changes the entire understanding we have of it. Just simply changing our language changes the reality and the view. A few other things to consider has to do with names, naming something. Have you thought about your own name, for instance? Have you ever asked your parents how they came up with your name? Some of you I know have actually chosen nicknames, or you prefer to go by an alternate name that is on your identification. Most of us don't change our name. We don't pick our names, but naming is really important. And there's a lot of, not just the fact that it identifies us on paper, but our name now tells the world a lot about us. So what if your name was something that wasn't particularly respected? There's a pretty interesting clip in the slideshow about that. What if you had a name that was already associated with something terrible? Would you change your name? Would you feel like it's not your responsibility to change your name? And have you ever thought about what it takes to change a name? For those of us that have gotten married, or if you do get married, you have the opportunity to change your name. It's commonly assumed in our culture that a woman will take on the name of her husband, but that's actually something that is based on legal ownership. The prefix MRS actually means Misters, she belongs to him. When in fact, guys can change their names too. You don't have to change your name, but naming is something that is so significant. So when people have names that are considered unusual or difficult to pronounce or have a unique spelling, on one hand that can be a real benefit, but sometimes it turns out to be a detriment. So I think it's a good thing just to kind of maybe ask your family where your name came from, or if you know anything about it, if it's significant for religious or cultural or a historical reason. And even maybe take some time to research the types of products that we use and how those are named, or the way that our government and any other kind of what's called a gatekeeper, the organizations that put out the information for us, how they choose to name things and talk about it, because that shapes our whole understanding of the identity and the essence of it. All right, so as you continue going through our slides, keep in mind also that our language gives us a chance to connect with people, so we might change our language to sound more like some group that we want to be a part of. Especially think of, as you get into your career, you start using the language of your career. If your parents or your older siblings or old teachers want to feel like, hey, I'm cool, like I know what you're into, I'm into that too, they might try to use more slang and kind of like pop culture language, which might sound kind of dumb coming from their mouths because it doesn't seem like it would fit them. But when we do that, it's called affiliation. We're trying to find connection. We can also use language to separate people. You know, we might want to disengage from them. We might want to show that we are not connected with them. And we know that language, of course, has a lot of problems. Language can be used to put people into stereotypical boxes. It can be used in racist, sexist, and very unpleasant ways. And there are certain experiences that people have through language and actions, but primarily through language, which are called microaggressions. So take some time to watch the video about microaggressions and also look at the list that I included in our week 6 module. See if you've heard of any of those before. Now, the thing about microaggressions is that these are words, phrases, and it could be actions that are intentional or unintentional, but have the result of being offensive to the person on the receiving end. So you might look at that list and be like, why would anybody say those things? But the fact is, it's on a list, and that list comes from UCLA, saying like these are words and phrases that are not going to be protected under free speech because they have such a hurtful outcome. And microaggressions are not something that only happens to certain people. It happens in degrees. So we've probably all experienced something where a person made an insult and they maybe didn't even know they did it, or they did know that they did it, but it comes across as being, it's supposed to put us in our place, or it's supposed to show that they have superiority. I think an example might be when, like, regardless of where you're at, when the president refers to reporters as you people. That phrase, you people, has a pretty significant historical context, and it's meant to basically devalue the group that's being called you people. So we have to look at those things and consider, like, what was the intent behind it? Did it just come out? Or was there some more nefarious idea? And that's where we get into this idea of microaggressions. And so take some time to watch that video. Ask yourself if you've ever experienced any of those. And the best recommendation I can give you is, I think you have to pick your battles. You know, if it's somebody, you've got that, I think we all have that one relative who like makes inappropriate jokes, who has maybe out of touch perspectives of the world, and you just hope that they never say those things in public. If it's a friend, if it's a family member, it's somebody that you know that you can talk to openly, I would say talk to them about why those words and phrases and those actions are inappropriate and hurtful. If it's someone that you don't know, if it's a stranger, if it's a random person, I think you have to judge the situation. You certainly don't want to get into some kind of serious altercation with someone. You don't want to have a resulting injury or arrest, you know. So sometimes knowledge is power, and the ability to know that we are in control of our own actions is more important than the reaction to it. But take some time to look through that. All right, as we continue through, and I know I'm going through this quickly because you're going to have lots of time to look through it yourself, know that our language is never precise. We have more than one word to describe the same thing, and so language lives in different degrees, and we have super precise, which can be really confusing, and we can have super ambiguous that can be really confusing. So take, for instance, if you ask someone like, hey, what are you doing? And they go, I'm just doing stuff. Like, what does that mean? You're doing stuff. Well, where are you? Out. That's not very helpful. Well, I mean, like, where are you? Oh, I'm at Starbucks doing homework. Okay, now that's more precise. So now you have an idea of location and actually what's going on than just like, I'm out doing stuff. So language goes from being vague to like, I have no idea what you're talking about. Ambiguity means I can interpret it a couple of different ways. Precision means I'm telling you exactly what I mean and we understand it. And then we can go the other way, which is called circumlocution. It's a fancy word, which means using big, complicated language to be confusing. So there's some different examples of that throughout the slides. You'll see some examples of like saying things nicely because we don't want to be hurtful, but then it's kind of unclear what we really mean. We could say things really mean, which is clear what we mean, but sometimes people like back off of it and go like, oh, well, you interpreted it that way. That's not what I meant. We might use language in a way that implies, like winky face, like, I know you know what I'm talking about, but I'm not going to say it. I'm going to let your mind go there. So you're the one with the dirty mind, or you're the one who made that assumption. It's totally not on me. And then we have doublespeak. And doublespeak is where a person will basically lie to your face, but make you think like they're not lying. So they use language in a super manipulative way. So there's a really good video. It's a little long, but it's talking about how just like making things sound nicer doesn't take away the essence of it, but actually changes what we think the person is talking about. That happens a lot in politics, and especially around times of crisis. I do definitely want to draw your attention to the whole idea of the power of words and how it affects us personally. So, language is a tool, and it can be used as a thing to build relationships, as I said earlier, or it can be used as a weapon to completely tear us apart. So we need to be responsible with our language. Sort of like we did with perception checking with the last chapter, we also have responsible language, and this is talked about towards the end of chapter 5. So it is basically like perception checking. So remember in perception checking we said like, hey, this is what happened. Is it because of this? Is it because of that? Could you please clarify? In responsible language, I think that this is really helpful, especially when we are starting to have a miscommunication or a disagreement, rather than accuse someone. Because look at this, if you point your finger at someone, you have 3 fingers pointing back at you. So as soon as we blame somebody, it's really trying to deflect away our own feelings or our own interpretation of something. And we want to be more responsible with it. So say for instance, maybe you made a mistake. Maybe you forgot something. Maybe you said you were going to do something, you forgot to do it. And it makes let's just say this. Maybe you told your roommate you'd go out and buy toilet paper, and then you got busy and you forgot to do it, and now you're out of toilet paper. And your roommate's all mad, and they say like, I can't believe that you forgot to get toilet paper. What's wrong with you? Now, hearing that might make you feel defensive, angry, and then want to lash out and make some kind of snide comment back, which now we still don't have toilet paper. Now we're just mad at each other. So a responsible way to respond would be like, okay, hey, I feel threatened when you're yelling at me about the toilet paper because I forgot and I didn't mean to, and what I really need from you is to just be patient and understanding, and I'll go out and get it as soon as I can. Or what I need is for you to know that I didn't mean forget to get it. So it might not be the answer that is the easy answer, but as you take some time to look at how we use responsible language, the goal of it is that we take ownership of our own feelings, our own interpretations. We point out the objective situation that has occurred, and then we give some guidelines of how this situation could be remedied without being threatening. Another example might be like, maybe somebody did say something offensive to you. They made a comment, they're talking about politics. That seems to be always where people get offended, right? So you're like, hey, I feel uncomfortable when the topic of politics comes up because it always seems to lead to an argument which damages our friendship. And so I would really like it if we could talk about something other than this, because your friendship means more important to me than talking about politics. So again, responsible language, the idea is that we're taking ownership of our own perspective, our own feelings and thoughts. We are giving an objective perspective of what's happening, and we non-judgmentally, non-confrontationally try to let the other person be able to come to an agreement with us. So take some time to look at that. And the final bit of responsible language that I really want to point out to you is the idea of how we also need to be responsible for ourselves. So there's a lot more in this chapter, but I think one of the biggest lessons that we can think of for us as we build confidence in ourselves is thinking about how we talk about our own experiences and our own fears, concerns, stress, stuff like that. So take, for instance, public speaking. A lot of people, I teach public speaking, and I hear all the time, nobody wants to take public speaking. They dread this class, which, for me makes me feel like, oh, great. But I understand. Public speaking is not easy, and like 0 people are all that excited about doing it. But we have an option. Remember how we talked about self-fulfilling prophecy a while back? Like, we could decide things are going to go positive, or we can decide things are going to go negative, and then we tend to take action in that way. Well, language is a really good example of that. So if we change the way that we talk about something, we can change the way that we act about it. I'll give you, for instance, I have a friend who has a lot of anxiety. She's just a naturally anxious person. And people always have levels of anxiety, but my friend has a high level of anxiety all the time. And she had to give a presentation for her capstone, which is like the last class she has to take in order to graduate. And she was really, really nervous about it and was like doing everything to kind of avoid it. And she was getting so worried about it. She was breaking out in hives. She was breaking out in she was sick about it. And I asked her, like, what are you worried about? And she's just like, I don't want to do this. I really think I'm going to fail. I hate this so much. And I was like, okay, well, let's think about it this way. It's a challenge. It's the last step to reaching your goal. It's only going to be for 15 minutes of your life. And think of all of the work that you've already accomplished and all of the things you had ahead of you. What if we think of this as an opportunity? What if we think of this as a way to challenge yourself, as a way to push yourself beyond your boundaries? So instead of saying, I'm anxious about this, she started to say, I'm excited for this opportunity. I'm looking forward to doing this. And in fact, when she gave her presentation, she started with, I'm excited to have this opportunity, even though in her mind she was like, oh my God, I'm dying. My brain's going crazy. I don't even know who I am. I don't even know what day it is or what planet I live on. In her mind, she was thinking one thing, but she was saying, I'm excited for this opportunity. I'm looking forward to sharing this with you. Hearing herself say those words led to her feeling less anxious. And that's actually been proven with research. Within about 90 seconds of us telling ourselves out loud, I'm excited to do something I don't want to do, our anxiety level drops. Isn't that crazy? So take some time to look over that part of this slideshow and watch the videos and ask yourself if you can change the way that you talk about something. So kind of a challenge I have for you is to think of 3 things that you would typically say, I don't want to do this, I hate this, this is going to suck, I'm going to be terrible at this, I'm going to fail, blah, 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 blah. And instead of focusing on those negative feelings, let's reframe them to say, I'm excited about this. I'm looking forward to this new opportunity. It could even be like being in an online class. I'm nervous about this. I really am confused. I'm overwhelmed. I don't know what to do. Instead, let's turn it into, I'm excited to have this new opportunity. This is going to give me a chance to really develop my technical skills. I'm going to be able to use this in my future career because maybe I'll get used to having video conferencing, or I'll be able to organize my time. Maybe I'll be able to teach somebody else how to do something. So in essence, chapter 5 is all about how we tell our stories. We choose the way that we talk about the world around us. And by simply changing a few words and phrases, we can make it a positive or a negative experience. We can change the truth and the reality of our perceptions doesn't change the truth and the reality of the world, but it changes our perceptions. And if we're responsible with our language, if we're responsible with how we communicate with other people and with ourselves, then we can build those relationships. We can use language as a tool to come together rather as a weapon to drive us apart. So I hope this is helpful. I know that's pretty quick. You have a whole slideshow, you have a whole chapter, you have lots of videos to look through. You do have a discussion question to answer this week, as well as there's no quiz for chapter 5 this week. It'll be for next time, but make sure you go in and do that test. You do all the assignments for this week. If you have any questions or need help, please reach out. And I guess I'll see you online. Thanks, everyone.